I'll introduce us. Well, welcome to the Hank Russell invitation. I hope you all are having a wonderful day today. My guest today, we're finally here. So Justin Dobbins, he sent me this guy about a year ago, and I was going to schedule for it back in the fall, the winter, late spring. It's been a long year, but I've really wanted to talk to this guy because he's got a fantastic story, and I'm telling you, man, I need to listen to this guy. This is someone I need to listen to. I should have listened to Justin Dobbins last year. I probably would have been in the same position that this guy is. He is the host of the Fat Guy Forum podcast. His name is Mike Gorman, but today he will be referred to as Gormy. Hey, brother.
Hey, man. How's it going?
It's going, man. Just having some. I'm sorry it took so long to get you here, man. It's been a long year. It's especially the last 8 months or so.
Understood. Been a wild year here too, so all good.
Well, I could have. I mean, at least it wasn't my year was more business related. I'd started a business and then closed it down in a very short amount of time, and it was just it was killing me with this. This is my passion. I don't know about you. I don't know what your passions are, but all I ever want to do from the time I was 14 years old was be in broadcasting. So this hurt for me not to do this with you.
Well, I'm glad we're getting to do it, man. We're here.
You're a lot younger looking than you say in your profile.
Well, I am 51, so.
Oh, nothing wrong with. Hey, no, hey, man, look, losing that weight probably knocked off a lot of age too. I bet. So you lost 250 pounds or 300 altogether.
Well, that's part of the story, isn't it? I have been down 300 pounds. Where I was at down 300 pounds wasn't the most sustainable for me. So more in the 250, 275 range is where down is, and actually in weight anyway, is the more sustainable place for me, where my body's thriving and I'm able to move well and do everything that I need to do that I couldn't do before. I would say right now I'm a little up from there, and kind of getting back focused on that. Like you said, been a rough year for you. On the personal side, has been a pretty rough year here, and allowed for some deviations, and I wouldn't say old habits, but behaviors and things I'm sure we can get into and talk about.
Oh yeah, so what's your height for the record?
I am 5'11".
Okay, so not a real short person, but that's a lot of weight to carry on you anyway, regardless.
Okay. Yeah, I was almost 550 at my heaviest.
Yeah, well, when I talked to Justin Dobbins, he was like, what was he at, 700 pounds?
Oh, yeah.
And he's 6'7". That's ridiculous, man. I couldn't believe that. It happens, but... So let me go ahead.
The human body is an amazing thing that can adapt to and handle a lot of things that we don't always think about.
I'm not going to post my weight live because I'm bashful about it, but I'm significantly heavier than you are now. So I need to get it together. But I started doing Diamond Dallas Page. Did you do his program?
I did not, but I have friends and have talked, Justin, but obviously a lot of guests on the podcast have had some really great success. Yeah. And I have a couple clients that use that as their physical activity as well.
I've been doing it for 2 to 3 days a week for the past 2 months now, and I noticed a difference after 10 days.
No doubt.
And I didn't have to do a whole lot. I'm sorry, my high impact athlete days are over. I'm not going to be doing any, jumping. I'm sorry, jumping is out of the question.
Well, that's the great thing about that program, isn't it? It's adaptable for wherever a person is. Absolutely. No matter what level they're at.
I saw I've seen 2 that really inspired me, but Butterbean just had one where he had to drop a certain amount of weight so that he could actually have hip surgery and did DDP. And then the other guy, he's been around for a long time, but he was walking on them forearm crutches, and then a year later he's running. So
it's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did this journey begin? When did you start losing weight, or how did? Or let me rephrase that. You can tell me when it started, but what made you? What was like the last straw that said, "I got to get this going"?
Well, I feel like a lot of people, there's been a lot of last straws in my life,
Hmm.
at various points. My history with weight loss goes back to the age of 10, which was the first time my family put me on Weight Watchers. That was not voluntary. I would say the first time that I started doing things from a voluntary place was probably after high school, even though there were some more mandatory periods of weight loss during that time.
Hmm.
Uh, and mandatory, I guess, in quotes, but when you're 16 and your parents say, we're taking away the car if you don't go back to Weight Watchers, that's a pretty significant experience. So it shaped a lot of my perspective on weight loss. I think growing up, a lot of the things that happened in there affected trust and things along those lines. I'll very quickly say when I was 10 years old, I was over 200 pounds, and that was when the family basically staged an intervention. My aunt, who was the Weight Watchers queen, was the one because at that point, and I think rightfully so, small children weren't allowed to attend Weight Watchers meetings or go and do those things, which
Oh,
I think is right.
I wouldn't.
Um, so they were going to put me on like a modified home version, and she brought me into the bathroom to weigh me. Made a lot of all these promises about no one else is going to know. It's between us. I'm going to write it down here in this notebook, and because I'm old enough, as we established, to be long before phones and tracking and all of those things. And as soon as I stepped on the scale, her face dropped, and she ran out into the living room where pretty much my entire extended family was. Mom, grandparents, cousins, and said, "Oh my God, he's over 200 pounds." And that kind of had a serious impact, I think, on my development, my relationship with my body, my relationship with food, and just even interpersonal relationships. But from there, my weight went up and down for a long time. Post college, I would say is when I started kind of what I would call the 100-pound parties, for lack of a better term, where I would find a plan, decide to dedicate myself to it, decide this is the time I have to do it, and drop 100 pounds and drop it with relative ease. When I'm focused on something, I'm really good at it. Especially when it comes to these sort of areas. And so I would have those periods where I would lose 100, gain 150, lose 100, gain 200, and continue to kind of bounce around. And at my heaviest, like I said, I was near 550 pounds, could barely stand for a few minutes, like standing up in front of a group. I worked in higher education at that point, worked with students, and having to lead sessions and trainings and having to be the trainer with a chair because there was just no way I could talk and stand at the same time. My mobility was awful, and I knew I needed to do something, and I knew I needed to get serious. So I thought about what were the kind of the things I had done before, what lessons I had learned a little bit, and made a concerted effort. And over a couple of years, from like I would say like 2008 to 2011 or so. Oh, actually, let me do the math. So it was like 2010 to 2013 because it was my 40th birthday. I remember that, and I was born in '73. Um, I had gone from nearly 550 to just a little over 200 pounds, and thought I had won, finished the race, crossed the finish line. I think an attitude that most of us share, especially because we're not really taught about these things, is once you quote unquote fix the weight, everything else falls in line, and that's really not how it works. And I needed to learn that lesson the hard way. And from that point in early May of 2013 to the end of 2013, I put on 280 pounds in around 6 months, 7 months. Um,
Oh
Rapid.
wow.
Yeah, I fell back hard, and I remember the exact sequence of events that kind of brought me back into that fall off. But I'm like the title says, I'm a lifelong food addict, and
Yes.
it's about so much more than just changing the plate and changing what you're doing and changing how you're moving your body. And I think we hear diet and exercise being the primary drivers of weight loss, but I think the primary driver of sustaining anything is really working on your mind, working on what's going on mentally, emotionally, everything in there. And I fell off hard and went right back into the mindset of, well, this is how I'm meant to be. This is my life.
Hmm.
You know, how I enjoy my life. It's, food was entertainment, food was everything. And taking that away without working on what food actually was, just set me back into that kind of awful pattern. And from 2013 to 2017, I basically just lived life back around 500 pounds, and
Hmm.
had decided, well, I guess decided or figured out that I probably was going to die,
Oh wow.
and die young. I guess young compared to other people.
Hmm.
And I even at one point had written letters to my family that I kept by my bed at night, because I was worried I wouldn't wake up the next day.
Oh
From
really? Oh
Mhm.
my goodness. I mean,
That this is when I talk about that adaptability of the body and the mind. Like, that was okay to me. At that point in my life, that didn't seem crazy, and I know now, my perspective on that is very different now. Uh,
sure.
yeah, and went through some things with my family in early 2017, that made me realize for the first time, and however old I was at that point, in my 40s, headed to mid 40s, that I wanted to live. And I had realized, it became very real to me. There was a situation going on with some children in my family where my parents were taking custody of children. And I had a conversation with my father one night where the conversation was about him realizing how his life was going to change at his age, taking on infants, literally, again. And he said to me, we're going to need your help. We're going to need you to help us with this. And it wasn't him saying, we're going to need you to help, and I don't think you can do it at the size you're at, anything along those lines. There was never that form of judgment or anything along those lines there. But I went home that night and realized that I had already prepared myself to pass away before my parents. And how could I do that if they needed me? And it was like all these connections start to be made. I start to realize that I didn't just want to make a change for them. I wanted to make a change to be the person that I wanted to be. And that was the person that I wasn't being for a long time. And that was hard. And so I had to really sit down and think, what have I done wrong before? How did I approach this wrong? How do I approach this now with this idea of I have an actual purpose, and I can't just give up when things get hard. I can't just give up when I get bored. I can't just give up when I miss the way I used to eat. All of those things that used to come into play and convince me to give up. And so that it was February, February, yeah, it was actually Valentine's Day of 2017 that I started the journey that I've been on now for the over the past 7 years.
Oh my goodness. I mean, and that's fantastic. And from what it sounds like, now your story, you don't make your story as dramatic when it comes to, like you seem like you have a very positive light the way you talk about
Mhm,
the dramatic situation.
mhm,
But from what it sounds like, it's what I've always said is that in order for people to change, you have to lose. Like you have to. There's something that has to happen to you where you have completely lost everything that makes you the person that you are supposed to be.
mhm,
You know, I can't imagine me not. I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Uh, y- you know, in any situation, whether it's drugs, alcohol, food, anything like that, people may get hooked up in it because it was a good time, and then all of a sudden you become dependent on it, and it's who you are, and it defines you as a person,
mhm,
and maybe not to others, but to yourself. And
mhm,
then next thing you know, it overtraps you to the point that it's going to overwhelm you and catch up with you, and then you have to lose. I mean, or
mhm,
then you've lost, and hopefully, whatever it is that, however you've lost, has made it to where you can mentally change yourself to put yourself in a much healthier situation.
mhm. No, I 100% agree with that, and I think the biggest thing I had to do was get ready for the mental fight that was going to come
Yes.
because of what you're talking about, the decades of habitual behavior, the decades of what I used food for, what I always said I was never an emotional eater. Like if anyone ever asked me that, like you ever end up in those kind of conversations,
Hmm.
and I think it was the realization that I was very much an emotional eater, but it wasn't just that I responded to like strong emotions, which happens for a lot of people.
Right.
Have a really bad day. For me, it was constant. It was a constant numbing. It was a constant blocking of every feeling on some levels of not wanting to make those greater connections. So I buried that in food, or being afraid of those greater connections, or just not really knowing how to. Well, I mean, you look at the number of times that you try and fail when it comes to weight loss, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. And eventually you build up like a callus that covers up the possibility of hope. And so you do everything you can mentally to make where you're at be okay. You people,
Justify it.
you become the funny fat guy. You identify as it. Like I was big, boisterous, and that was my identity. I never, as much eating as I did behind closed doors, I didn't hide it in public. I wasn't one of those people that went out to dinner with friends and was like, I'm just gonna have a salad. I was the person who was gonna order 2 entrees and drink an exorbitant amount of beer and like all of the things that because I could then put those things out there about myself before anyone else could make those judgments. Like, and I also think to some extent, I'm consistently as much as like I think we all go through periods where we create excuses and delude ourselves on things. I was honest in that it was never. I never would say I was out of control. I guess is what I'm coming to. Like it was never. This is outside of my control. And I think that was one of the things that actually worked against me at some points, and then ended up helping me. Was I owned my behavior. I would not deny my behavior. I was. This is me. This is what I do. This is how I live. And eventually, that you become so good at that making change becomes hard because you've convinced yourself that that's your identity. You've convinced yourself that the way you are, the way you move through the world, or don't move, more realistically, is who you are as a person. Instead of realizing that who we are as people is about so much more than that. And it can be about the things that we're missing. And like you talked about kind of hitting a loss point. Like I honestly don't even I made a lot of significant change in early 2017 and was doing great from a mental place, checking in with myself, staying conscious, being very, very consistent. I had a period where I actually fell off that summer, fell right back into old behaviors, put on 30 pounds back of the 100 plus that I had lost already very quickly. And the interesting thing was usually when I would fall off, when making a change in my life, it wouldn't just be I fell off and then a month later I'm struggling and fighting to get back on and doing the things that going through that beating myself up. I was very easily able to kind of flip that switch and feel okay. But because I had done all the work for the previous months on being in touch with myself and checking in with myself, it was different that time. And I actually came back from that deviation within a month, which was the first time I had done that without it taking years, without it taking me running into a physical impediment or being afraid of what was happening health wise with my body. Like I was able to build the connection between how the food I was eating made me feel, and that was new and surprising to me. And I know it may sound silly, but I felt like garbage when I was eating garbage, and I was able to acknowledge that
Hmm.
for the first time and say, you need to stop doing this. Let's get back to what you were doing because it really was helping and you were feeling a lot better. And I was back on track, and that all felt good and great. And I was conscious of it, but I don't know if I was fully conscious of it until late 2017, um, when I was hospitalized for pneumonia. And that was a huge experience because I had avoided doctors for over 20 years. Hadn't gone for a physical, would not get things checked. If I saw symptoms of anything happening, I would treat it my quote unquote treat it myself. I knew I had wild blood sugar issues.
Yeah.
So eating low carb, they would go away. And I would kind of self doctor, which is horrible. And I don't recommend that to anyone. Um, but late November, early December of 2017, I, after spending almost 10 months saying I'm fighting to live, like I had post-it notes hung up all over my house that said, "You want to live." And I hung them everywhere. Like that was how focused I had become on my why and my purpose being important. And I hit this point where I got what I thought was a cold or the flu, had it for like a week and a half. It went away. I felt a lot better. It came back. And when it came back like a Mack truck slamming into me. And I realized I think it was on a Monday that I realized this wasn't going away. This was getting worse. You can barely stand. You stand up and you can barely breathe. Something's happening. And I knew that if I didn't get help, I was going to die. I knew that. And I'm kind of a worst case scenario person, preparing for the worst.
Sure.
So on Tuesday night, called my dad and said, I need to see a doctor. It's embarrassing to be 44 and say, I don't know how to see a doctor. My last regular visits with a physician were back when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I need to go to the ER. I'm really in bad shape. I need to do something. I actually packed, my dad has a good friend who was a general physician. He said, I called him. He can see us early tomorrow morning. Are you sure you don't want to do something now? And I said, no, I'll be fine tomorrow morning. I somehow made my way to my dad's truck. I had packed a bag because, like I said, I'm a worst case scenario person. So I had phone chargers and books and underwear, a lot of underwear. And because I knew I was going to the hospital, I knew that what I had wasn't just here, take this pill and you'll be fine. We went to see my dad's friend, and my dad had kind of misunderstood, thought I had flu symptoms. I was sitting in this examination room at this doctor's office. He walks in and his face drops, and he immediately puts a pulse ox monitor on me. And my oxygen, where for you to be healthy, your oxygen should be around 95%. And I was down closer to 80. And he immediately was like, you need to go to the ER. You need to go right to the ER. By all rights, I should call an ambulance. But if you guys promise you're not going to go anywhere else from here but right to the hospital, because we had talked about what hospital to go to, he's like, you just need to go there right away. I'm going to call them and tell them that you're coming. So we went to the hospital, and this was facing the biggest fear of my life. Like, my avoidance of doctors had turned into real, like, medical phobia. And I was panicking. I knew I had to do it. I knew it was out of my control. And that also, I think, speaks to the personal philosophy I was developing. I'd really gotten into stoicism at this point. And I was like, there are things that I can control and there are things that I can't. And right now, this is something I can't control. So we got to the ER. They immediately take me to the back, rip off my shirt, attach monitors everywhere, oxygen. And that, honestly, was surrounded by people. And I don't want to say I disassociated, but I just said to myself, you have to let them do what they're going to do. Whatever the answer is, you have to accept that you're going to hear that answer. Years of being afraid of being told I had heart problems or diabetes or anything, whatever that comes of this is going to come of this. So I don't even honestly remember how I went from the ER to upstairs, and I was in a room. My family was gathering, and the doctor came in with x-rays of my lungs. And I don't know if you've ever seen x-rays of what a lung should look like, but they should be clear and black. Like, your lungs should have like a white outline and be basically black. Like,
Oh, really?
the x-ray can penetrate it. My lungs were completely white except for 2 pencil thin lines at the top. And the doctor said, do you see this? This is pneumonia. And right now, we have you on the highest oxygen possible, and we're barely getting you up to where you need to be to not be in a danger zone for organ damage. And then said the words, if you had waited an hour or two, you probably would be dead. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this is a contribution to being overweight.
Well, I caught pneumonia. You catch bacterial pneumonia, has nothing to do with your weight.
Right.
how my body was handling it. Honestly, how my body was handling it was probably what saved me was the fact that I was down at over 140 pounds, almost 100,
The-
150,
you-
160 pounds at that point.
right. I was contributing to your survival. I didn't know if the weight loss had anything to do with the survival
Mhm.
because what it sounds like, it was very severe.
Oh yeah, like I ended up being in the hospital for almost a month in the
Yeah.
hospital on oxygen. They defeated the pneumonia, but still couldn't get my lungs back to functioning
Yeah.
properly.
I
There was talk of having to be surgeries. They said my lungs were hepatic, um, which is your lungs should be soft like cotton. You know, your lungs should be really not solid, and my lungs were solid. The inflammation in my lungs was out of control.
the yeah, I was just talking to a new friend of mine last night, and he had had pneumonia to the point that it affected his motor skills, and he had to learn how to learn how to do everything again. I mean, he's it's been 2 years, and he still wears like loafers or cowboy boots just because he's having a hard time learning to tie his
Hmm.
shoes. And this man has a
Oh,
full
it.
time and this man has a full time job.
Hmm. It's devastating. You know what? And I had let it get to this point was the big thing that was in my head. Like, so I went to that place of I need to listen to what they say and control what I can control and keep doing what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Became it was funny because every new and this was we're heading now into like mid-December that I was in the hospital,
Yeah.
and so doctors' shifts are changing a lot with the holidays and their holiday plans. So I was seeing new doctors, excuse me, almost every day, and everyone that would come in, the first thing they would talk about is, so how much oxygen are you on at home? Um, have you considered weight loss surgery? Like it very much they would not. They knew that my weight was contributing to where my health was, but they had assumed that I was in very, very poor condition for a long time and that this was just kind of like the tipping point. And I'm like, up until a week ago, I was going to the gym 6 days a week at 4 o'clock in the morning. I've never been on oxygen in my life. Like, and so I actually started putting my before picture as the background on my phone. So every new doctor I've been, I could just start the conversation and kind of cut it off and be like, this is where I was in February. You know, this is where I was in February. This is where I am now. I know what I'm, and I, I feel like I educated a lot of the hospital staff, especially on low carb eating, and because I'm a keto guy for people that know me, um, and I had to work through a lot with the food at the hospital and like those little bitty stories that aren't important. But when they brought me the first, they said, well, we have a diabetic friendly menu. We'll bring you that. It's lower carb, and the diabetic friendly breakfast I got the first morning was oatmeal with a packet of sugar, a blueberry muffin, orange juice, and some scrambled eggs. And I said, what about this is low carb? And they were like, well, if you got the regular meal, it would also have had toast and a fruit cup. And I'm like, okay, I need to talk to someone. I need to talk to someone.
Yeah,
And
yeah. No.
it was wild. And I would have nurses coming in from all different floors because they had heard that I was there and had lost so much weight and wanting, like, I'm trying this, I'm trying keto. Do you have anything you can suggest? It kind of got to be funny. They wrote the words keto in big letters on my whiteboard, just so people would know.
Yeah.
And I'm not telling this story to take up our whole time talking about me being in the hospital, but some significant things happened during that time. I
Well,
had a doctor come in. I had a doctor come in one morning and say, "So when did you have the heart attack?" And
oh
I was
wow.
like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "At some point, you had a heart attack, and we're just wondering when that happened. It's not in your records." And I was like, "I'm not ever aware that I had a heart attack." So we had to kind of go into this like big history discussion of like, and the funniest thing was the first question he asked, like, "Well, did you ever have any nights where you went to bed uncomfortable?" And I'm like, I was over 500 pounds. Every night I went to bed was uncomfortable. Like, you need to
Yeah.
get a little more specific for me.
I
So
need
we
to
actually went.
I
Go
need to
ahead.
interrupt you one second. Where are you from?
East Coast, New England, Rhode Island specifically.
Okay. I'm just curious. Okay, so
Hmm.
continue because I'm going to not
Hmm.
visit this hospital.
Hmm. Well, it wasn't their fault. I was missing 25 years of medical records, and There was no, luckily, the thing that he very quickly established was there was no physical damage to my heart. It was electrically how my heart performed. Like there was tests
Yeah.
that can show that you had a heart attack in the past. Um, what we were able to kind of narrow down is that it probably occurred after like extensive interviewing. Like we had a conversation for 2 days about this. Um, the summer and fall that I put on all that weight rapidly is probably when it happened.
Okay.
And obviously, I said a prayer because it was not enough that I actually was walking around with residual physical damage or parts of my heart dead or anything along those lines. But I went from never seeing a doctor to now having a pulmonologist and a cardiologist. And the pulmonologist was this great, great guy. And I actually worked with him when I got out of the hospital. He came in and he's like, you need a doctor. And I'm like, well, I'm in here and I have about 15. And he's like, no, you need a general physician. So I'm going to find you a general physician who you will see the day, the week that you're allowed out of here. He goes, and you need to keep seeing this person. And
Yeah.
at that point, I'm just like, okay. I mean, to give you a picture of what it was like, for the 22 days I was in the hospital, I could not get myself to the bathroom. I could not take care of myself when I went to the bathroom. I could not stand without my oxygen plummeting. So we were working to get me to a place where I could leave the hospital with oxygen and go from there.
Oh,
And I spent Christmas in the hospital. That's not a very cheery. We had actually planned a giant family trip to Disneyland that I had been planning for a long time. And that got rapidly canceled.
yeah.
Because most of my family that was even going to go on that trip flew in to be there, because it was probably 2 weeks before they actually said, okay, you're not going to die. So now we need to work on what we need to do to get you better. We've gotten you out of this critical place. And it was dramatic. And I get out on New Year's Eve of 2017, which also was the year that we had one of the worst ice storms ever in Rhode Island.
Oh, wow.
So it was in the negatives, like -15, -20 outside. So when I left the hospital, that was fun to get my first breath of fresh air in almost a month, and it was air that hurt. And I wasn't going to be able to go outside any soon. We had a blizzard. It was very, very wild. But during that time, like the thing that happened for me was I realized that was when things kind of came to a point, and I realized that I have to control the things that I can control, and I have to let go of the things that I can't. And it just became
serenity prayer.
Yeah, very much. I was reading a lot of Stoicism, Stoic books that I had actually bought right before I went in the hospital, and so was doing had a lot of time to read when you're sitting in a hospital bed all day, and just came through that experience certain that I was on the right path, certain that what I was doing was the right things for myself, certain that making change was not just about vanity or anything along those lines. It was about really reclaiming my life. And I feel like I was given that experience so that I could actually solidify that in my head. I could understand that. And it wasn't like I had any, right up until that time, I was going to go off plan or anything along those lines. And, I had a solid plan already dialed in for the holidays and for my travel. But I came out of that realizing that this isn't just about changing what's on my plate. This isn't just about changing how I move my body, because I'm doing all of that. This is really about changing how I relate to myself and how I want to relate to the world, and what I want to be as the person that moves through this world. Like, who am I as a person, and what are the things that I feel are important for other people to hear from that experience. And that was also kind of around the time that I started sharing more on social media of my journey, and getting into just wanting to not. Everyone's been through a lot of things. People go through a lot of different challenging things, but I really started to feel like there were lessons that I was learning on this path, that sharing them with other people and having conversations about that was not just going to be about helping them, but about helping me live in this place of constant mindfulness and understanding of what I needed to be doing. And, you know, my journey went from there. I actually lost weight when I was in the hospital, which I think, happens to some people, doesn't happen to others.
Was
And
was there fat or muscle?
um, from the scans that were done, I lost a fair amount of muscle just from being bedridden for almost a month.
That's what I was
But
thinking.
there was a significant amount of fat loss as well. I
Okay.
came out of the hospital almost 30 pounds lighter.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm with you. I just thought I'd ask because I've heard, like, when I had hernia surgery about 12 years ago, 12 and a half years ago now, I had lost about 20 pounds. I'm not sure how much of it was fat, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was, not eating. I was only eating like liquid and a
mhm.
little bit of solid, but not much. But I couldn't go to the bathroom for 6 days. So I was just curious if it
Mm.
was muscle or fat. So I didn't know this at the
Um,
time.
yeah, like I will say when I left the hospital, I was still on oxygen. I was on oxygen for another 2 weeks after that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on this ridiculously long oxygen cord from a machine at home most of the time. I had to stay with my parents because my apartment was on the second floor of a house and I couldn't do the steps. I had to really kind of rebuild. And this is like I said, going to the gym 6 days a week, feeling really strong in the gym, doing great with that to, okay, step one is let's go from the couch to the kitchen and walk around the table and get back to the couch before you pass out. Like it was a scary period of recovery and a scary period of having to, because I had it in my head, like as soon as I get out of here, I'm back to doing everything 100% for myself. And I had to be willing to accept assistance. And, you know, I cried the first time I took a shower alone. Like, and I took a shower with the oxygen with me in the shower the first time. Like, it was an experience I would never want to wish on anyone else, but one that I feel in the end made me a lot stronger. So
Yeah.
whatever happened, physically to me, I was able to move myself forward
Mm.
and doing that because of that work I had done to be conscious. Because I think it would have been really easy to just to give up.
Yeah.
The past in the past, I probably would have just said, well, let me just turn this into a pity party that won't end. Um,
Was
and instead I used it to keep that fire going and make it even stronger.
And that's good. I mean, I can't imagine. I don't want to. I don't want to say ending it all, but if you're not progressing, then what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Well,
scary.
that's
That's
well,
scary.
and that's the thing I say to people, all the clients and friends and anyone I talk to all the time.
Yeah.
Time's going to pass anyway. Time doesn't stop for us. Like we can never
Yeah.
put it on hold. So do I want that time to be time that I am doing things that I know are positive for myself, or do I want that to be that time doing things that I know are going to move me backwards or keep me sitting in the same place that I'm at?
Exactly. I mean, I've been. I mean, I've been there. It's. I mean, this is. I've lost a tremendous amount of weight,
Mm-hmm.
and I've put it back on, and I'm at the current position that I was in before I dropped a lot of the weight. And I was thinking about when I started doing the DDPY a month or 2 months ago. It's the beginning stages of me at least trying to do something different than I was doing before that. And if I'm doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, then I'm definitely not going to get nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that I think jumps my story a little bit forward. I had been doing keto on my own, like
Yeah,
done my research, following a ketogenic diet. I had a friend that was a personal trainer, and that's where most of my workouts came from. And I hit a point where weight loss had almost completely stopped, and I was actually starting to put weight on again.
yeah,
100% eating a ketogenic diet, which there's a lot of people out there that like to tell you that just switch, cut carbs and weight magically drops off and you can eat as much as you want. That's bull crap. I was out eating my diet, and that's the point in the past where I would have given up. It's the point where I would have said, this is too hard. I don't know what to do to change this. And so I did something different this time. Again, like you talked about, like making different choices because the same old isn't going to help. And I actually decided that I needed outside help. I needed a coach. I needed to work with someone who maybe knew a little bit more than me and that was a significant change, because I'm that person that has to do everything himself. And if someone else helps you with it, like you're somehow failing. And I kind of lucked into an opportunity with someone who he was just becoming a coach and was looking for a first client. We were friends, and he said, "Look, I'm looking to do this, and if you'd like to be my first client, I'd love to work with you." And I think that helped ego wise, because I think in the back of my head I had it that regardless of what he helps me with, if I feel like it, I can probably pull some stuff over on him, or
Yeah.
work around that, which ended up not being the truth. That was just that little piece of me that was like, well,
Mm.
he's a new coach. You'll probably be able to trick him a little bit. And I surrendered to a process and um, saw more, significant changes, like in terms of having a better understanding of what I was doing nutritionally and how my body was responding to it. But go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, man, like, when you started this process, were the withdrawals bad?
Um, Honestly, for me, the withdrawals don't get bad until after the first month, because I can push through adrenaline wise. Like, I went from
Really?
eating a wild standard American diet. Like, I'm not someone who's ever going to say, I was over 500 pounds and I barely ate a salad with chicken on it.
Right.
Um, I did not go through, because I had done research enough to realize that this thing called the keto flu isn't a real thing. It is something that happens because you start to get dehydrated and you're not getting the right electrolytes when you're
I
starting a ketogenic diet.
I, I
Go ahead.
was I started it, man, and I had to pee like
Mm-hmm.
seven
Oh yeah.
times, like 10 times in one night.
Well, because your body's holding on to a significant amount of water. Like in general, when we are very heavy, we have extra water on our bodies. But yeah, the body has to hold on to 4 grams of water for every gram of carbohydrates that you're eating to process.
Yeah.
So when you cut the carbohydrates out, and that's why everyone has that significant great loss that first week or two when they
Yeah.
switch to a low carb diet. Um, I like I said, I didn't go through because for me the withdrawal and craving side of it is, for the most part, when I'm eating a ketogenic diet, psychological and not physical. So it's once that mental adrenaline starts to wear off and I start to realize, no, this is what you're doing, that starts to get harder for me.
I
But
was
yeah, peeing
yeah.
a lot, peeing a lot. Your bowel movements change. People don't always talk about that.
Yeah, I was constipated for the first couple of days.
Mhm. And well, and it's also because we start to realize that we're not meant to crap as much as we do. It's because of the food that we eat, for not to be
Of course.
indelicate. But
No.
when you're putting in a lot of food that it can't really be digested, or there's products to it that can't be digested, that's when I mean, again, I've dealt with this with other people, but for myself, I was a very regular guy. I was going, this is way too much information, several
Yeah.
times a day. And that first time that I realized I was going once a day or once every other day, I panicked and I'm like, am I just constipated? But I
Yes.
realized that I wasn't bloated. I didn't feel like I was straining. I didn't have any signs of constipation. It was just that the significant change I had made to what I was eating once my body adjusted was, you're not producing, you're eating mostly protein and low carb vegetables. Like there's not a lot of waste. Your body is digesting. You're breathing out a lot of the waste products when it comes to protein. Um,
Yeah. No, I was just curious about that because you said that your withdrawals were pretty bad after a month. I mean,
mm-hmm,
I remember okay. The hardest part for me was like kind of like it was in my head all the time, and I was irritable, I was talkative, I was, extremely obnoxious, you know, and I had to function on my normal day-to-day activities and stuff like that. And man, I was not the best person to be around during the time that because I'd cut 90 pounds in 3 months doing the keto.
mm-hmm,
And I just remember I pissed off most of the people around me not, be- and I was irritable. I didn't want to talk to nobody. I didn't really want to speak to nobody. I would, it was insane. And I'm like,
mm-hmm,
like, where are you at now with this? I mean, you're still doing ketogenic, right?
mm-hmm.
Are you
Oh yeah.
losing?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
What kind of mental state are you in right now? Are you still pretty irritable all the time?
Honestly, I never really got irritable all the time. I think I on I don't know your full situation. We haven't really got into all of that, but
Okay. Okay.
I think for me, I understand the purpose of my choices, so I don't feel like I'm missing anything. And I think it's when I start to think about things that I'm missing or old behaviors that when I start to have the negative emotion. Like instead of focusing on all, it's one of the things you hear a lot. You know, keto is very restrictive.
Yeah.
Um, I believe that every weight loss plan is restrictive, and I think it's another load of bullcrap that people put out there. But it is restrictive, but it's restriction with choice. No one punished me and made me do this, you know, and I think
No.
that's one of the biggest mental shifts for me. This isn't about punishing myself. This isn't about I have to do this because I've been bad. I have to, you know, this is about doing this because I want to do this. And if I
Yeah.
want to do this, I have to be okay with what I'm doing. And I also honestly like I'm also one of those people that I don't deal well with eating the same foods every day, you know, repetitive. I'm a very, you know, I'm obviously love food. Like I'm a foodie. Like,
All right.
so I found the challenge of like trying to find new recipes and new ways to prepare things and new foods to try were things that made me happy. You know, I doing that with purpose and not just for the sake of eating gave me a buoyancy. I think mentally in some ways, like I most of the work I feel like I've done over these past years is shifting my perspective on the
Yeah.
things that I'm doing and understanding that this isn't a journey that has a start and a finish line and that this is about like lifelong changes and lifelong sustainable changes for me. And it's not lifelong sustainable changes for other people. I think if you start a ketogenic diet with the intention of I'm going to do this till the point I lose weight, and I'm going to go, then I'm going to completely change how I'm eating. But I'll be miserable while I'm doing this. But I'm going to accept that I don't really like this, but I'm going to do it because it helps. I think that, and I'm not saying that was your perspective, but I'm saying a lot of people do that. Um, that's what makes it unsustainable. You know, they're choosing a path that isn't something. The way I talk about it is I had someone very early on, you know, when I started doing this or once I was seeing really good results say, yeah, but you're gonna be able to live life and never have cake again. And I said my perspective isn't that I'm going to never have cake again in my life. My perspective is if for some reason I was never able to have cake again in my life, I could live a happy life and thrive. So I can make a choice, but it's not me saying that I'm just going to live without something for the sake of punishing myself or living in a place of that I always live with that specter of restriction.
Yeah. And Kevin Hart said it too. You know, Kevin Hart claims he's not a foodie. So, you know, like he doesn't like have to have. He says, I don't. It's not that I have to, or it's not that I'll never eat fried chicken ever again. It's just not a part of my regular day to day thing that I have to have.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's because that's what people say. Like, I would do keto, but I can't give up bread. I would do keto, but I can't live without cookies. Like, and usually when someone comes to me and says that, I say, come back to me when you think that you could live without that. It doesn't mean that you're going to, but you have to understand that if you are making that change, that I, my body has never felt better than when I'm
Yeah.
dialed in. My energy has never been better. It's never
Yeah.
moved better. Like my
Yes.
health has never been better. I mentioned that general practitioner that I finally started seeing, and he was very wary when we first met. He was open to the idea of fasting, but was not very wary. You know, very open to the idea of low carb. And at my 6 month check in, I went to see him, and he comes into the room, and he looked like a kid who had a secret they wanted to tell, and he's like, okay, you know, because we had been working together on tests and a lot of constant communication over the previous months, and he's like, I have something to tell you, and I'm like, okay, this is weird that we're starting my checkup with you telling me something, but okay, and he's like, I started keto a month ago and I've lost 20 pounds and I
Mm-hmm.
have never felt better, and
Yeah.
I'm working with someone else on this, and like we spent probably 20 minutes, and then he finally realized, well, okay, we need to do your exam and get you back to work. Um,
Yeah.
but it was understanding that there can be that progression in our understanding of why we're doing the things that we're doing and how that fits in for us. And if that means at some point I have to, like, if I hit a point where my body needed a change, I feel secure now that I would make a change. Like it's no
Yeah.
longer about I'm on a diet to hit a certain point. It's not about I'm punishing myself, restriction. I'm going to keep saying those words over and over again. It's about making choices that serve me, and these
Yeah.
are the choices nutritionally that serve me. These are the choices
Right.
that allow me to fit into everyone's cars. to be able to. When I was at my heaviest, I couldn't clean myself in the bathroom without help, without
Yeah.
extensions to do that. I couldn't shower without a chair. I couldn't stand in front of a group of people and speak. I couldn't. If my work required me to walk, I would drive my car as close as I could. I used to, the college campus I worked on. I worked in the dorms, and I used to get in trouble with the campus police all the time because I would drive my car to the front steps of a building I had to go into
Don't
because
and
I
don't
couldn't do
and
anything
don't get me
else.
started on toilet habits. So there
Yep.
you go.
The bathroom, clothes access, like there's silly things that come that are better, but there's things that you know I like to say it's about losing the weight that's inside your head,
Yeah.
because when you are significantly larger, you have to spend a lot of time planning everything that you do. You
Yeah.
have to know, especially going to a new place, is there seating that will fit me? How far do I have to walk? Is there parking? What is it like in the place? Is it very crowded? Can I move between the tables? And to be able to get to a point in my life where I wouldn't initially say no to things, and I because I didn't know what the experience would include and if I could physically do it,
Hmm.
was incredibly mentally freeing. It's you don't realize how much space. Even just I look at there was this this is I don't mean to be morbid, but I've had a lot of deaths in my family, and there were points where you'd have a death happen out of nowhere, and I would be like, I do not have any clothing that will fit me that I could wear to a funeral. Okay, and now this you're going back 20 years to some of this, so all of the online resources didn't exist or they were very limited. King size was the only place I could get clothes from because I had outgrown casual male XL, or DXL as it's known now, and shipping took 2 weeks. So if I had a funeral in so I was the person going to a funeral in pants that shouldn't have been worn to a funeral and a messed up polo shirt. Like, that seems silly, but knowing that I could access better things for myself in terms of how I wanted to present myself meant a lot at different times. And I outgrew a car that I loved once. Like, I loved it. I loved the truck that I owned. I got too big for it. Like, I'd had the chair moved already. Like, there was nowhere else to do it, and it was becoming dangerous for me to drive. The impairment that my midsection put on the wheel. At my heaviest, I had an 84-inch waist. Like, getting in and out of a car was near impossible. And once I was in there, I was stuck. So being able to just not have to, people talk about outgrowing clothes. Like, I'm talking about being at a point in your life where you're outgrowing vehicles and having to change your vehicle because of these things that you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's significant when you can sit down and realize all of the things that you don't have to do anymore and the space that creates to see the possibilities for what you want to do in the future. And it's not just about planning fun or things along those lines. It's about how do I actually, how do, again, my words are failing me, but my movement, I say movement through the world. I don't just mean physical movement. Am I moving through the world in a way that I'm not the person putting barriers in front of myself anymore? I run into things that I can't control. I run into barriers. We all do as human beings, things that are completely out of our control. But if there is something that's in my way and I can be the person that's not putting that barrier in my life anymore, that was what drove me.
Yes.
That idea that I wasn't the one that was holding me back.
I can't. Yeah. I mean, that is the hardest thing, is that, yeah, outside forces will make it more difficult. But the inner fight is to me, the inner fight is not that difficult, really. In my eyes, it's how to deal with the outside forces that make my inner side kind of, reject the possibility of growth. It's really
I think, no, I'm curious about that. Like, because for me, I think it's like I agree with you that on the inside, we can know what we want to do. Like,
right.
I think it's externalizing what's on the inside in terms of action.
Yeah.
That becomes one of the hardest things, because there are a lot of things that we can't control, and you have to acknowledge that and stop letting the outside forces be the things that affect our choices.
Yes.
They can affect our feelings. Like, I say this all the time with clients. Like, you can feel however you're feeling. I'm never going to invalidate your feelings, but I want you to realize that your feelings don't have to drive your actions anymore. You can still do the things that you need to do. Like, I still, to this day, and I know I know fitness professionals that agree with me on this. Like, There are days that I get up and go to the gym and I don't want to go. I sit in the parking lot for 10 minutes convincing myself to go in. After the workout, I feel great. I never regret it after. But I still have that time where it's just like, I feel like I could be doing something better with my time. Or do I really want to
Yeah.
do this? Or I would have liked an extra 2 hours of sleep instead. Like, we wage those mental battles all the time. But, and I say this too a lot, like a lot of my challenges, like we talk about when you were sharing like your initial idea for the title of the episode, and twice a food addict was something that came up into your mind. And to me, I'm forever a food addict. That will never change. I just get better at handling the challenges that puts in front of me. I get better at acknowledging that they're growing stronger. I get better at handling the challenges that I used to bury in food.
It doesn't get easier. You just get better.
Mm-hmm. Which is cliche for a reason.
It is. I don't know if it's not a cliche saying that we use a lot. We think that the situation is always going to be as hard as it is. It's not. You're just going to get better at it, but if the situation's the same.
And there's going to be new challenges. Like life doesn't like I said, life doesn't have a pause button. Life doesn't have a I just need an easy week button. But
yeah,
go ahead.
That ladder is still going to be 20 feet tall when I climb up it. No matter, it's always going to be 20 foot. Is it easier? I mean, no. I just got better at climbing it.
Right. Are you going to use one hand to climb that ladder, or are you going to use two and do everything that you can to make sure that you're using two hands to climb that ladder?
Or are you going to practice enough to where you're in the condition that you can go up that thing with ease?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big issue in this country. We're all guilty of it. There's always that fear of starting, and then there's always that fear of, you having to pivot when something happens. I mean, the biggest issue with this is that food addicts, it's like, there's not really a rehab center for it that you can live at 24/7, at least not from where I'm sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously with drug addicts, it's a little bit easier. I don't want to take away from drug addicts, but you get where I'm coming from. It's not like I can drive by and not see a McDonald's. I could drive by somewhere and not see that substance that I was taking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult.
It's
difficult.
Well, it's that whole, I don't pretend to understand what someone who's addicted to drugs goes through at all, like anything along those lines. The metaphors, they work sometimes and they're not, clean transitions. But I do think the fact that we are forced to confront our substance of choice every day, because if we don't, we'll die, is a significant burden to carry. But it's a burden we get better at carrying. Like, it's not always the same. And it doesn't mean, and again, like, I think sometimes people want to get to a point where they feel quote unquote cured. And I don't think it's about curing. I think it's about understanding who you are and the things that you need to do to take care of who you are, and prioritizing those things. See, there are a lot of times, like I said, a little over a year ago, my mom died. And a few months later, my grandmother died. And this has probably been one of the hardest years of my life. And it would have been very easy to close my social media and just disappear. And I thought about that. There were definitely days that I really thought about that. And I'm not saying social media keeps us alive or anything along those lines, but the full metaphor of just withdrawing from the world and letting what happens. And I didn't do that. And did I make some choices that in the end that were choices, like that? I don't say that I again ever felt out of control. It was, I chose to not make things a priority at points that I needed to make a priority actively, because I was focusing on other things. But we come around to this place of learning about how we handle challenges and how we handle tragedies and how we handle the good times. Like, I can't say the number of people that I've spoken to that their issues with food don't even necessarily have anything to do with sadness or pain. It has to do with the fact that they celebrate everything in their life with food. They have a great day and it's food. Like, and that's why, like, like I said, for myself, good, bad, or ugly, I was celebrating, food was a part of it. But I think we start to learn what are the situations and the patterns that trigger us.
Yes.
What are the things that, I say one of the phrases I was actually just talking with a client this morning about was, if you know there are things you can do to make the path forward for you easier, why are you choosing the things that are making it harder? And that's not a question I ever expected an immediate answer from someone on, because
I
I think
couldn't
it's something that really needs to be thought about. Like,
I couldn't answer it
and,
immediately.
well, I don't think you should. I think sometimes when we have easy answers to deep questions like that, we're not really getting to the real answer. I
No.
think but it is about, like, okay, break it down situation by situation. You had a great day with food yesterday, the metaphorical you, and had challenges that were coming. You had a family gathering, and you had three different family gatherings in one day, which happens to people a lot. And you navigate all of them intact, and then you get home and it's nighttime, and you put the kids to bed, and the next thing you do is you go down to the kitchen and you eat. And the immediate response I think sometimes people have to that is, well, I'm just broken and there's nothing I can do,
Hmm.
or it's just my patterns, that's just my habit. And the questions that I start to ask are like, in the moment, what were you thinking? Like, what was actually happening in that moment that made it okay to do that? Like, don't punish. Questions aren't accusatory or punishing. They're what was actually going on, so that you can then identify what are the things I need to do to avoid that the next time. What are the pieces I need to put in place? So, and sometimes that means, we set silly rules for ourselves. Like, once I'm upstairs and the kids are in bed and I'm in bed, I'm not going downstairs, no matter how hard that feels. I know that I don't need more food. I may mentally feel like I need more food or I want more food, but I know that I don't need it. So what do I need to do to protect myself for that night? There were nights, and this is like when you asked about like withdrawals and things along those lines. During that first 6 months that I went keto and was losing weight again, there were days that were so hard that I would put myself to bed at 5 o'clock, and I had that luxury. You know, that's not a luxury that people with kids have, or well, if they
Hmm.
work a night shift, anything along those lines, or they work doubles. But I had the luxury of going to bed before the sun was even near going down sometimes, because I knew if I stayed up, it wasn't going to lead to something good, and I didn't know the answer in that moment. So I didn't know the answer, so I did what I had to do to protect myself, because I do think sometimes
Yes.
it's about having to, and it's all that's also the whole, one of the core concepts that I work on with people is having a deep understanding of why this change is important and why it matters to you, not just if someone says to me, well, I want to be able to buy clothes at a regular store. I'm like, okay, that's great, but why is that important to you? Well, because then, I'm not going to have to spend as much money on clothes, and I'm going to be able to, just go in anywhere that I want to. Well, why is that important to you? And eventually, a lot of times, what that comes down to is, well, I feel this real disconnect between accessing things in the world. Like, I can't just, my choices are made for me. My options aren't, I don't have options. And I'm like, okay. So if every day when you're starting to feel like you don't want to follow your plan, or you don't want to go to the gym, or you don't want to do the things you need to do, you need to remember that that purpose is about giving yourself greater access to the world, and that really matters to you. And that was the thing for me. Those mornings where I'd wake up and I didn't want to do what I needed to do, I would say, yeah, but you don't want to die. So if you don't want to die, no matter how much you want to pull into McDonald's on the way to work this morning, you're going to choose not to, and you're going to let it be hard. You're going to let it. That it's one of the things that pisses me off the most in the weight loss space is all of these promises of losing weight with ease. I can, or I'll teach you how to eat all of your favorite foods without restriction, and you're going to lose all the weight that you want to lose.
Mm.
Like, those are false promises, because when you actually talk to that person about how a person does that, it's going to be, well, you used to eat a full bag of fun size Reese's cups on Halloween night. What I
Yeah.
want you to do now is I want you to have one, and I want you to be satisfied with one, okay?
Mm.
And then you've had all you want, and that's great. But we know that that's not real. We know that sometimes for some people, and I can say this for myself, that one Reese's cup lights a fire where all I want is more. So I can have one and stop, but I'm setting myself up for a night of having to fight that feeling. So
Sounds
if
like
not having that, go ahead.
no. I was about to say it sounds like a beer. One's not enough, and
Mhm.
20's too many.
Right. And I think for some people that is how it is with food. And I think there are people out there that it really is just about, they don't have an understanding of nutrition, they're not dealing with these issues, and so they can make those changes and they can make them with ease. And I think promising that to every person is not the right way to do it. I think at the end of the day, it's about having to acknowledge and know yourself and address those challenges. I've worked with clients that went very strict keto, lost weight and wanted to transition to more of a paleo way of eating or untracked, whatever their transition looks like. But even approaching that from a mindful place, like understanding that you have to be honest with yourself. I think very specifically about a client who all he wanted back in his life after he hit his weight loss goal was oatmeal. That was
Yeah.
all he wanted back in his life. So we had actually worked with him on a ketogenic diet. I transitioned him to a higher carb level after, we went through a reverse dieting process, got him up to a higher carb level where having oatmeal once a week was, for him, was going to work great. And he was ready to go, working on his own. And he came back a few months later and said, as soon as I started reincorporating the oatmeal regularly, it went from once a week to twice a week to 7 times a week to I can handle oatmeal so I can handle donuts again. I can handle this so I can handle that again. And he started feeling like garbage when he was doing it, but he wanted that oatmeal back in his life so bad that he was willing to ignore that until he couldn't ignore it anymore. And I think that happens sometimes where it has to be about understanding that there may be times we have to say no to things for the rest of our lives. And it doesn't mean we have to say no every time, but there are going to be times where we have to say no. And for some people, that feels like I'm having to restrict and punish myself forever. And I think instead it's like, again, it goes back to that. You don't drink before you drive. Like setting yourself, you're in a vulnerable place, like work is really stressful. You're getting into arguments with your spouse. You're having a really high stress week and you're an emotional eater. Turning to foods that trigger that emotional eating isn't going to serve you at that time.
No.
But 6 months later, you're on vacation and you're going to a restaurant where you're probably never going to go there again, and you want to try some food and you want to see how you do with it, and you have it and you're fine. And I'm not saying that every person goes through that, but it can be about having to know, where am I at today? What do I need today? And I'll look at what I need tomorrow when tomorrow comes. And I don't know if that's making any sense, but I think it's just having that understanding that one of the things that we should build on these journeys is the mindfulness to know that when we can say yes and when we can say no to things is important for the rest of our lives.
And it's, I wonder about people that are in shape, like the bodybuilder, maybe not the bodybuilders, so to speak, but like fitness models, fitness people or whatever. They manage to stay in shape and have this diet to where, they can have like a slice of like toast with avocado on it and stuff like that. It's, if I get to a certain weight, can I do that? But I'd have to be like a gym rat to do it. And I don't know if you're not a gym rat though, are you?
I mean, I go to the gym. I enjoy the gym.
Right.
I wouldn't say I don't live there.
Right.
But.
Well, why is it that, maybe it's because life is not fair, but why is it that you and I can't have like a slice of toast with avocado and peanut butter, like everybody else can, and be able to maintain their weight through exercise along with not having anything that's horrible? I see these people all the time,
Oh yeah. Well, I think one, their bodies are different metabolically from a physical place. I think also their relationship with food is different. To me, having one Reese's cup on Halloween doesn't mean the same thing to someone who's just having that Reese's cup randomly. And they're having it because they really want to have it and it's fun and all of that. But for me, it's never just been about having one Reese's cup. Yeah. It's never just been about having one piece of toast with avocado on it. So I have to be conscious of who I am. And it doesn't mean that I'm broken or there's anything wrong with me. It's just that my relationship with food is different. And I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay with, because also I think too, like you can break down, and people are going to say this all the time, because yes, that person who appears to be in perfect physical health, and in front of us, we see them having the burger and fries and onion rings and, a couple drinks out at dinner. They're not eating like that every day. And they're also not triggered by that experience to think about doing that again immediately. No. Like it's not, I haven't had French fries. These are so good, I'm going to have them every day now for the next 6 weeks. Like for me, having something that steps outside of the boundaries of I know what's safe for me does set me up for that challenge. And I can get through that challenge mentally. Like I can just put myself back on plan and go through it. But it's, do I want to constantly be in that battle? Do I want to constantly, after every meal, feel like I'm igniting a fire inside of me that can only be quenched by more food? Or do I want to make nutritional choices that allow me to feel some freedom and some relief from the food noise. I think food noise is something that's come up a lot, I think, in the discourse lately because of weight loss medications and the impact that they can have on food noise for people. And I don't think we talk about food noise enough. I don't think we talk about what our relationship with food when we're not eating. It's still there. And for some of us, it can be an omnipresent thing at times that's overwhelming. And I do think it is an area where change is possible and relief is possible. I think when you align your nutrition with your body so that you're managing physical cravings as much as possible, you can start to work on what's driving these emotional cravings, what's got me in this place. And I do think at the end of the day, you can work on all of that. But when you've spent decades of your life in those patterns of behavior, they're like caverns, not caverns, valleys carved by water, in your brain. That constant stream has been running over your brain so many times that it's well-worn grooves that sometimes those grooves are just going to be there, and we have to navigate them and have to do what we need to do to navigate them.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an earful. I mean, it's not something that you're not going to figure it out. You're not going to figure it out after a month. You were talking a minute ago about the withdrawals and stuff like that. Not only are you not going to have this figured out in a month, you're not going to probably have this figured out in a year because you've got potentially so many years on this planet and things are going to happen differently. If I do well for a year, something is going to happen in between. Even after a year, something might happen and that will set me to where I have to pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest issue that you have in life is that you have to be flexible about things and you have to pivot when things aren't going your way. I mean, I've done great I remember for the first 3 weeks of keto, I did excellent for 3 weeks. And, the first time I did it was in 17 and the second time I did it was in 18. But then you got through these things where you're irritable. Then you got these things that something triggers you. I hate that word trigger because it just, it's so cliche in 2024.
Oh yeah.
It's such a cliche word, but
Well,
go ahead.
No, I think one of the things too is just, and of course now my brain's gonna fart and not go in the right direction for what I had a really salient point I wanted to make that was really, really knowledgeable and would sound fantastic to people. But I think we get to a point, and now I remember. Okay. I'm not going to just word vomit for a little bit to try to remember. I spent over 40 years of my life eating garbage, treating my body like garbage, and having this horrible relationship with my body and with food. So the thing that I tell myself is I don't get to complain or allow myself to sit in a place of feeling like it's unfair until I've been working on it for 40 years. If I put in 40 years and I'm still feeling like it's exactly the same, then I am allowing myself then to get pissed off and be like, okay, this isn't fair. There's no reason why this should be happening. That's a silly metaphor. It's a silly exaggeration and hyperbole. But what I mean to say in there is these habits and patterns that we are trying to change have been around for decades. And just thinking that one thing is going to change it overnight is where we start to, we live in an Amazon Prime society where we want everything delivered in 2 days. Change isn't going to come delivered in 2 days. Change can take years to make. And it can take hard years, hard years. And it's being okay with it being hard. It's being okay with knowing that also amongst the hard days, there are really good days where things feel really good. And
also knowing that you will fail.
Mm-hmm.
You will fail. I mean, obviously you don't want to be a failure, but you will fail at certain things and you'll have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and get yourself back on that horse.
Well, what is it? What is the saying? It's like fall down 7 times, pick yourself up 7 times. Like you can keep falling, but as long as you're picking yourself up. And the important thing is to learn. Like I had to learn what was the right way of eating for me. Like I think people will say, well, I tried this and I tried that. I think it's important to ask yourself the questions of what drew you to that way of eating in the first place? What are the things that actually did work for you? What are the things that didn't work for you? Yeah. And don't go off of what you see someone else doing and just want to do what they're doing. Find the path for yourself, because at the end of the day, as much as, my keto friends don't like when I always say this, but at the end of the day, it's about achieving and maintaining a caloric deficit to lose weight. Find the tool that's going to help you do that. And
Yeah.
for me, keto does that. It helps clear up food noise. It makes my body feel better. I have better mental clarity. I have better focus. If for someone else, it's just tracking macros, if it's just tracking calories, that's great. But it has to be something that you feel is giving you that ability to do it from a sustainable place, from a place that you can actually, because we're not talking about losing 20 pounds, with a lot of people, especially the people I talk to. We're talking about losing hundreds of pounds. And that's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to, yes, there are for some people that it happens in 6 months, and that's amazing. And I think, what that person did may even have been not great for themselves or whatever, but it is about making some lifelong changes and understanding that the hardest battle isn't losing the weight. The hardest battle is keeping the weight off and finding that sustainable life that still keeps in focus what you need to do for yourself while you're quote unquote going back to the world.
Yes, I agreed. And I wish I had a better response to that because,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yours was pretty self-explanatory there. I mean, I'd say this: one of the biggest issues with guys like us is that sometimes we think about things too much too. We
Mm-hmm.
really do. I look at these people at the gym. Like I go to this barbershop. It's called Alpha Cuts, and the name speaks for itself. And I remember I was talking to this guy. My friend, he was the head of the barbershop, and he was like, "Hey, we were talking about a bunch of us were talking about anxiety and depression and thinking things through too much and stuff like that." He says, I don't have that problem." And I'm thinking, is it because you exercise a lot and you're loose, or is it because you're too dumb to have this problem? Are we just overthinkers? Are we too smart for this? I mean, what is it? I mean, and you don't have to answer that out loud, but
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, like I've noticed that about people at the gym. They don't have to. People that have these that work out and are like Adonis types, man. I noticed that they're not really like the best thinkers all the time.
Well, I think in a lot of ways we usually are overthinkers. I think we want to find the perfect answers. I think it's one of the things that paralyzes us often.
Yeah,
We want to have the perfect plan, and that's why I spend so much time just saying it's about getting started. It's not about having all the answers on day one. It's not about having all the correct information or knowing what your choices need to be. It's about being willing to look for those things as you continue to move forward. It's being willing to sometimes say, "Yeah, I'm way overthinking this. Like I am wasting so much energy trying to find a mental answer to something that comes from actually taking action. It prevents us from taking action. It prevents us from staying in that place of even mindfulness of the fact that we're falling down mental, rabbit holes. Like I think it is just sometimes about letting go. It's about letting go mentally and saying, I don't know what the answers are going to be, but I'm going to give this a go. And if I'm not seeing the progress I want to see, then I'm going to make a change.
yeah,
But I have to be doing something.
man. I'm telling you, man. This has been great, Gormy. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
Well, is it okay for me to mention the podcast and that kind of stuff?
Of course, man. That's why. Of course, that's why I'm here. Or excuse me, let me get you. That's why I'm here. Because man, I'm gonna tell you. I don't even know where to find it. Where did you find it? Go ahead. Talk about your podcast.
So one of the things I realized, I really started getting into podcasts, and especially when I was hospitalized, honestly. And one of the things I realized was that there were a lot of podcasts out there that were being done by people that had actually never gone through a significant weight loss journey, that were talking about weight loss, and um, there was also a lot of material focused on women and their journeys and their challenges, which I think men and women have very unique challenges when it comes to this space sometimes. And so I wanted to create a platform where I was just sharing the stories of the regular dudes, not the ultra marathoners, not the guys that are winning physique contests, and had an off season from football and now we're coming back from that. I wanted to talk about guys that were not just like me, but had their own unique stories. So I created the Fat Guy Forum, and it's funny because the majority of the listeners are women, but I have a strong male audience too. But it's about sharing the stories and journeys of people, regardless of what tool they're using, what path they're following, and also regardless of where they are in their journey. I've talked to guys that haven't even started their weight loss and are just in that place of trying to figure it out. I've talked to guys that have lost weight, gained weight. I've talked to guys that have had weight loss surgery. I've talked to guys that have done that and been very successful. And I've talked to guys that had weight loss surgery more than once and failed every time. Like, had a lot of recent discussions about weight loss medication, but it's always about the story, because I feel like everyone's story matters, and there's something that you're going to be able to connect to in it. Not every guest on the show has been 500-600 pounds. I've had guys on the show that had 25 pounds to lose and struggled for decades with that. Parents, guys that are dads, guys that aren't dads, like professionals, artists. Like it's very much about understanding the uniqueness of a person's story and getting out to everyone, so you can find something in there that you might be able to learn from. I think we don't look to our neighbors' experiences to say that's exactly what I should do, but we can look to them for inspiration. We can look to them for direction or help with choices we're struggling with. So the podcast has been, how long are we now? Like we're over 5 years at this. Yeah, it's over 5 years. The fifth anniversary was this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this weekend, episode 286 is going up. And so I've had probably over 250 different guys on the show over time. Had some return guests who come back and share updates on where they're at, and we dive into specific topics. And it's just something that allows me to stay present in the discourse, of all kinds. I don't just like to live in a keto echo chamber. And I like hearing what everyone is doing and what they've been through, and seeing those similarities and seeing the differences. And, I've had guys on like me that have been on diet since they were toddlers. And I've had guys on that didn't put weight on until they were in their 30s and 40s and then found themselves struggling with that. Like every experience is unique, but has something that connects to the audience. So I have a lot of fun doing that, and like I said, it's been for 5 years. And I mentioned that I started with a coach myself on my keto journey, and he eventually became my boss. And we work together. Yeah, we do a lot of collaboration together, but I create a lot of content like blogs and newsletters and recipes at theketoroad.com. And that's also where all my coaching information is. And I'm on Instagram at Gormy Goes Keto. I try to go on X and Threads every so often, but I'm not that good at it. And TikTok scares the crap out of me. So I primarily live on Instagram.
Oh, man. Well, tell me the name of your, tell the name of your podcast.
So the podcast is the Fat Guy Forum.
The Fat Guy Forum. I love it. That's and where can we find this? Where can we find it on?
It's Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon. It's on every podcast platform. Podbean.
Yeah,
just
audio.
go on to whatever podcast service you use it. Go ahead.
Yeah, audio.
Yeah, it's an audio. It's not on YouTube.
Okay, cool. That's great, man. And that's what guys like you definitely need to do. Well, man, guys, I appreciate y'all out there watching this, man. Like I've been trying to get this man on here for a year now, and it's been a pleasure, Gormy. I can't wait to. I want to do this again. Mm-hmm. Maybe down the road here. I'm getting Justin back on here eventually. I just
nice.
Eventually, well, his post-op surgery and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh yeah.
So we'll get him on here, and we'll get you back on here eventually. But
sounds guys, great. It's been awesome.
That'll work. Well, this is the Hank Russell Invitation. Y'all have a good afternoon.